Oh buddy, we got some new Final Fantasy VII information. So it all started out with these tweets, which I'll go over in a little bit, and this eventually led to a trailer drop, as well as letting us know this game's going to be 2 discs, which seems pretty crazy. As for the trailer, it did feel a little bit more like a tease, but it did give us a few things that we can sink our teeth into. And I'm not surprised they didn't give us too much information. I mean, 16 releases this month, and I'm sure they want to keep eyes on that. My prediction though is that the Game Awards in December, we're going to see a big drop. So I'm going to take a look at these tweets before I talk about the trailer, and if it affects any of my past predictions. So the first tweet doesn't really give us that much information. It says they're still working and trying to nail down a release date, which Remake came out around April, so I wouldn't be surprised if we see a similar release window. Now the second tweet is talking about the journey we're going to take, saying we're going to get a high degree of freedom, and from looking at the gameplay, the amount of discs, and these maps are probably going to be huge. Also, I think the more interesting part of this tweet is the majority of stories. I think this means that we're going to visit some of the same areas, but the stories this time around are going to be much more different. So the third tweet is interesting because it focuses more on story. I think what they're trying to imply here is the threads of the old game and the new will start coming together and intertwining more with each other. Now we're going to start seeing a lot more character-specific stories or their destinies unfolding in front of us, mostly for the big characters like Cloud, Aerith, and Sephiroth. But I do feel like Zack will be a part of this in some extension. Number 4 mentions that new players will be able to jump right in as they took preparations, which makes me wonder how they're planning on doing this. Is it just going to be a quick recap video, or are they going to kind of information dump all over the place and make references as we go past certain events? 5th talks about the battle system, which I'll cover more when I start going over the trailer, but saying new comrades will join, which most likely references Red 13, as he seems to be playable now, Yuffie joining us, and we're probably going to eventually see Sid and Vincent dropped at some point too. Maybe when we get to the flashbacks we'll have access to Sephiroth, but I think he would function more like Sona on Intergrade. I just don't see them letting us control Sephiroth for some reason. And the cooperate with party members seems to just directly reference at the fact that there's combo attacks now. 6 just references that there's going to be new musical tracks and arrangements, which, yeah, totally makes sense. And number 7 is just saying more information soon. However, I do think if we pay attention on the background images of all these, it's kind of more telling of what we should look for and what we should focus on. Like, we see the scene of Cloud and Sephiroth from the flashback twice within these, and I think this is just going to show there's going to be a lot more interaction between Cloud and Sephiroth during this game. Now, we additionally see Zack and Cloud twice referenced, and I think this means, like many others as predicted, like we are in Zack's timeline, and he's going to be part of the story, and we're probably going to see him again at some point, and he's going to play an important role moving forward. Now, as we get into the trailer, technically speaking, there seems to be a lot of good improvements coming from Remake. We're getting what seems to be very large areas. I'm thinking this is going to be akin to what they're doing in Final Fantasy XVI, just large open zones with free range, and it won't be Breath of the Wild open world, but more controlled. One of the developers has mentioned how he likes how Horizon Zero Dawn is set up, and while I've never really played Horizon too much, from what I recall, these games did have the big large open zones and not just one big huge overworld map. That said, we're getting a nice array of areas. We're seeing forests, caves, some arid areas, and this is just going to be a nice change of pace from Midgar. I do have a small concern that it looks like Cloud and company are moving kind of slowly, but we do see that they do ride chocobos, and there is a chocobo call button, so I'm sure chocobo breeding is going to be a huge part of this game, and most likely the main way of traversal. I am curious though if this game is going to use the same chapter system that Remake did, or if it's going to fall back on operating more like a classic RPG. The thing I enjoyed about the chapter system is that it allows you to go back and play very focused parts of the game again without having to do the whole package. And this can easily be fixed by a codex, by seeing cutscenes, but sometimes it's fun to just randomly go back and play against Airbuster, do the final act without having to go through excess save files, or even start the whole game again. And the combat, while also looking similar, does seem improved upon. We're seeing a lot more new flashy moves in the shape of combo attacks, and it doesn't seem like Cloud's going to be the only one limited to these. We see Red 13 and Yuffie going up in the air to do some crazy double slash thing, and Tifa bouncing around Aerith's spell, even possibly enhancing her final attack from the assault. Now, it does unfortunately seem like we only keep 3 folks at a time, but maybe we can tag it and swap members out mid-fight, but it's hard to say at this point. Now, the main thing I wanted to get into is some of the story references and sequences they showed during this game and how it's going to affect any of the original theories and predictions that I had, which you can take a look at my original theories and predictions over here and feel free to roast me for them. Now, most of this new information doesn't really sway me from any of the original ideas I had. Sure, we haven't seen anything crazy yet like Genesis showing up, but I think they would want to hold that back for a bigger reveal. If anything though, it really doubles down on the idea that we are in Zack's timeline now, and they're trying to avoid having multiple versions of the same person, and that Bogenhagen is probably going to do a big exposition dump on us.
The life stream. It is the very essence of our star. The blood coursing through its planetary veins.
It does unravel some of my idea of Zack joining Barrett's squad and how those events would have played out and been adjusted from there, but ultimately they do kind of end up at the same place either way. It does kind of make me think though that maybe Integrate actually happened in Zack's timeline and not ours. So one of the main things I mentioned in my predictions video is that Zack would make the events go smoother that occurred in Midgard, and eventually they would end up in the highway chase with the party, with Zack either replacing Cloud or being present with him. My initial thought was that since we can't have two versions of the same person in a timeline, because I just made up that general rule and was taking a guess, Cloud and the others would just most likely disappear and Zack would end up going looking for them. In hindsight, it is kind of silly that I would say something like that, because them just disappearing wouldn't really make that much sense, but instead of Thanos dusting, it seems like Tifa, Barrett, Red 13, and Aerith are all possibly dying in Zack's timeline, which, as the news says, seems to be from a tornado, but I think this is most likely Sephiroth. Now, could these guys be alive still and have been taken to deep ground or something? Sure, but I think it's easier and cleaner just to have them die so you don't have to deal with doubles, at least for some of the characters. Now, this again does make me think Integrate took place in Zack's timeline, as at the end of that game, we see the scene where he goes into the church and Aerith is missing. I think after he does this scene that he's going to see this news update that we saw. Now, the reason we didn't see Cloud getting wheeled out is because I think there's going to end up being two Clouds in this timeline, which I know I said they wouldn't do, but I think they're going to do that now. Our main Cloud has crossed over into Zack's timeline, and now we have Cloud from this timeline, and I'm just going to call him Z Cloud. Now, I think what's going to happen is that our main timeline Cloud in this timeline is going to start seeing the memories and what Z Cloud is doing throughout the game, and this is going to help worsen his mental state even more so than his PTSD and Mako brain. It also seems like Tifa is starting to reference how Cloud's past isn't adding up, but actually talking about it more externally with other characters like Aerith, which I don't think she ever really did in the original. I think having this haze on Cloud's past, plus his mind melding with a version of himself who's possibly joining Sephiroth in the reunion, is really just going to mess up his head, and then he's going to need a nice big therapy session. Now, we see and hear Sephiroth a lot through the trailer, however, this doesn't seem like the same Sephiroth that we encountered in Remake. Yes, some of this is because we're seeing the flashback version of Sephiroth, but in the trailer we do see Cloud and company face off against the Sephiroth that Yuffie is deathly afraid of. But to me, the Sephiroth seems way different than the remake version that we've seen. Similar to what I did with Cloud, I'm going to call this version of Sephiroth Z Sephiroth. For starters, his outfit looks different than the Sephiroth we've seen before, but he also says in his quote that he killed her, so who is she?
You know that I killed her. So, who is she?
And I'm sure this is referencing Aerith. As mentioned before, Z Sephiroth most likely killed them during the tornado. This further makes me think that Z Sephiroth killed them all in front of Cloud and then forced him to join the reunion, and this is why we see Z Cloud in a cloak going to the reunion. This, however, would probably imply that there's going to be two Sephiroths running around, and who would know what the other one is doing that's from the remake, and it's really unknown or hard for me to guess right now. All that aside though, we are seeing the flashback scene between Sephiroth and Tifa, and honestly, I'm hoping this flashback segment is sort of the beginning of the game, and we just kind of start there seeing it from Cloud's false perspective, and then slowly blend back into our main timeline. I'm hoping this functions as kind of the tutorial area in the first act, having Sephiroth almost be the one teaching Cloud how to combat and use materia and all that good stuff. Eventually, once we get back to the current state of affairs, I think we're going to slowly start seeing the reveal of what's wrong in Cloud's mind, and how he's warped himself into this combination of himself and Zack into the same person. I am still holding on to most of my general predictions though that I made before. Like, I still think the planet's probably going to be a third part in this, and Genesis is going to end up showing up in the picture. I think this trailer is mostly only showing the first parts of the games, and again, we'll see a big reveal come December. But having 2 discs is crazy. I mean, this game's going to be massive. Maybe the maps are huge, but I'm kind of hoping that the second disc is just going to be all online Chocobo multiplayer racing. As always, let me know in the comments what you think, and like and subscribe.